So basically, we are, it's me, Francesco, and Begoña, Cabeza, Martínez. We are researchers and policy analysts at the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. And basically, we developed together with Susan and Istvan the Infra for Next Gen Make It Equal modules of the and of ESS Chronos. And so here we want to present you some of the results we did at the GRC on how surveys can support EU policies on social inclusion and equality. And especially we work at GRC in ISPRA, so where we, in a unit and in a group especially that does deal with survey methods and analysis.
Sorry, Francesco, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, I can hear you. Can you
take
over?
I can take over. Maybe let's not touch the slides just in case we ruin them again. Apologies for all the technical issues. They always happen in the worst moment. So Francesco already introduced us, so I'll be quick with that. We're Francesco, Berlingieri, Begoña, Cabeza. We work at the Joint Research Center at the unit S3, and more particularly at the Survey Methods Analysis Center, or SMAC. So today we basically want to show you a bit how surveys can actually support EU policy, and in particular on social inclusion and equality. So today, the agenda will be a bit of a short introduction of what we do at the JRC and in SMAC. Then I will guide you through one case study in a bit more detail, and then Francesco will introduce you to two other studies, which are also very, very interesting. So, sorry, I'm being asked to do something. It works. Okay, so what we do at the JRC. Next slide, please. Oh, now you can see me. That's even better. So JRC, in case you're not familiar with it, is basically the European Commission's Science and Knowledge Service. So we are a Directorate General ourselves, but our role is actually to provide independent and evidence-based support for those who are in the directorates in Brussels doing the more applied policy making. So that's a bit the broader context in which our survey support work sits. Then, well, in the next slide, we can see that basically the JRC was established back in 1957, and it had a very different purpose from the current one, which was nuclear research. So now, over these years, of course, this purpose has expanded to many other research fields, and is actually supporting many policy areas across many countries. As you can see, we are in different countries, not just here in Italy, where Francesco and I are. So we are about 2,700 employees, out of which the vast majority are people like us doing work related to research. And now let me introduce you a bit into our team, which is the Survey Methods and Analysis Center within Unit S3. So the way in which it works is that we support the Directorate Generals, the DGs, in their work when they identify a policy need. So basically, they can come to us when they have some sort of policy question, when they identify an evidence gap, when they want to know more about a specific target population, when they have a need to evaluate some policy. And then the way in which our team provides the DGs with support is in different areas. It can be in the survey design, it can be in the implementation of the actual survey, in the relationship with the survey vendors, for instance, or it can be afterwards in the data analysis of the data that they have collected. So then the last step of the process is hopefully that we are feeding into better policies implemented at the EU level, because these policies will be more evidence-based. So we will provide with more evidence-based insights and stronger policy design in general, because it will be based on the research that we've generated. I'm putting there our website and our email contact, but it will be again in the final slide in case you want to reach out. Please do. Now I think You're probably very familiar with this because you're attending a workshop of the European Social Survey, but just in case, a little reminder on how useful surveys can be actually for different purposes. In general, surveys are a great instrument to give people a voice to know better about their opinions, about what they know or they don't know about a certain topic. They also allow us to compare across different groups or different regions or different demographics, for instance. And not only that, but we can also take an opinion and see how it changes over time. We can have several variables of interest and then see how they have a pattern over time. They're useful tools because they help us support important decisions in the sense that we can identify priorities, whether society is more in favor of one topic or another. We can test whether policies are going to be more accepted or not. We can know what are the drivers of certain attitudes more in detail. Of course, there are many advantages. They are reasonably easy to set up, reasonably affordable, depending on what we want our sample to be like. But then, of course, you're fully aware they also have many limitations, and the results that we will obtain will be affected by certain biases, and this is a bit unavoidable, and we have to take it into consideration. Now, a bit more applied to what we do. How do we use surveys to assist policymaking? Well, I already said it a bit. They're useful to set policy priorities. For instance, if a director general is thinking about a certain topic, what aspect of the topic matters more to citizens, or what dimension of a multidimensional policy should we address first? Well, then a survey can be useful to know this. Then also to test policy acceptance. If there is some new policy that's going to be introduced, then we can kind of test the reactions to it beforehand, before it's rolled out. And this can be insightful as well to anticipate issues. And then again, when we have a particular attitude towards a topic, then of course different groups of citizens can have very different attitudes or different opinions about it. So then it's interesting with the survey to analyze more in detail these attitudes by identifying those groups that have divergent opinions and knowing more about their demographic or socioeconomic characteristics. I think this was just a bit of an introduction, but now I will actually jump straight into one example, which is just some of the projects that we do in which we assist Directorate Generals. In this case, it was DG Home, which is the directorate in charge of foreign affairs in a very broad way. And it was work that was a collaboration with other JRC units. I will mention them now. E5, working with migration and demography, and S1, which is the behavioral insights team. So this project was about public perceptions of fairness in the EU migration asylum system broadly. And the main data collection consisted of a survey across 8 member states. This is a citation for a technical report in case you want to know more detail about it. So as I said, this was a collaboration across JRC units. And we chose 8 countries across the whole European Union to have a bit of diversity of opinions, and the total sample reached 8,000 respondents, so about 1,000 per country. The method was an online panel, and we set quotas so that it was sort of representative, approximating the actual population in terms of age, gender, education, and region. And now, what's the rationale of this survey? Why was this project actually carried out? Well, the motivation, maybe you're familiar with this, there's been a new pact on asylum that has been introduced last year, is now being rolled out in the different countries. And the new pact on migration and asylum that was reached after heavy discussions across the member states, the main feature it has is that it introduces a new mechanism of solidarity between member states. So, of course, this will involve that asylum seekers the applications are not just dealt by the country, which is the first country of entry for asylum seekers, but actually all member states might have to accept some sort of reallocation of the asylum seekers or support financially in different ways. So then, as you can imagine, the fairness perceptions of citizens in the different member states are kind of important because they are likely to shape the trust the citizens have in the whole system and the solidarity they will show to other member states. However, the problem is that this is a complex topic. Right? Asylum system is not something that everyone might be very familiar with. So then citizens may have wrong beliefs or lack knowledge just in general about the system. And then what happens, well, that some populist parties or some agents might use anti-migrant narratives and trying to appeal to emotions, especially to fairness issues, to turn the public opinion against the measures that the European Union, for instance, might be trying to push forward. So what this project was trying to do was actually gathering evidence to have a better understanding of, first, what citizens know about the asylum system, and second, their fairness perceptions about the actual system and what the new system is introducing, this new solidarity mechanism. What this will be useful for, well, so that the European Union, in particular the DG in charge of this topic, would be able to do better communication around migration and asylum. And now I'm just going to go very quickly through a very narrow set of results. If you want to know more, I invite you to check the technical report, because there we have many more interesting results. Here I'm just extracting a few for you to get a flavor. So here we have a graph representing the distribution of the responses to a question made to respondents about what the most common reason for a person to seek asylum is in their country. And here what we can see is that out of the 4 options, there is a clear overestimation of the economic motivations, right? Many people think that it's actually seeking employment or seeking social welfare rather than escaping violence, conflict, war, or persecution. So we can see that there is a bit of a misperception of the actual reasons that people claim to apply for asylum. And you can also see that there are strong differences across countries. Opinions, for instance, in Germany are clearly very much towards these economic motives, while in other places like Italy, Greece, they seem to understand better that is the reason is mainly escaping violence, etc. So from here, we can already see that people might not have a super clear idea about the system. We also asked other questions about how many was the volume of applications that your country deals with. And here people were also very much off the real figures, which is, of course, understandable. And also who takes care of asylum seeker applications, whether the EU or national authorities. And these are, again, notions that citizens don't seem to be very clear about. So this is not that it's not the citizens' fault, of course. It's just the fact that communication about these topics is not very good, apparently, and it should be improved. Then in the next slide, I'm going to show you one of the questions about fairness perceptions. Here we're asking respondents whether they thought that their country was hosting a fair share of the total asylum seekers in the EU. And we can see that most respondents, about half, think that their own country is hosting too many asylum seekers. So they think that the amount is too high. Of course, again, we can see country differences. And something interesting, we also see quite a lot of uncertainty. Many people acknowledge that they don't really know, which is fair enough. You might not have a very clear idea of how much your country is hosting versus other countries. So I think it's positive, actually, that people were saying, well, I don't really know. We also see that some people think is fair, like a good fifth of the sample, maybe. So this is I think, an interesting insight. And also, you don't see it in this graph, but we had another question about trust in the EU institutions. And what we could see is that people who trust more the EU institutions and who trust more their own country are more likely to say that the share that their country is hosting is fair. So you trust more the system, and then you kind of trust that the people you're having, the asylum seekers volume in your country, is more or less okay. Then in the next slide, we are going to see what people think about the elements that the asylum system should have, right? So if we would ask you what are the most important features of the asylum system, for instance, that applications are looked through quickly, that asylum seekers have the same rights across countries, that they are treated equally, that the cost is shared equally, and that the volume of asylum seekers is kind of balanced. Out of these 5 features, we see that most respondents think that the cost sharing is actually the most important feature, that the asylum system should definitely get it right in the aspect of sharing the cost across all the EU member states. Of course, the other aspects are also relevant, but it seems that the cost is a major concern for citizens. And now I think in the next slide, I'm just going to mention very quickly about a couple of experimental designs that we introduced in the survey. So it wasn't just the module on knowledge or the module on fairness perceptions of policy preferences, but we also had 2 experimental designs. We thought that these were interesting to identify a bit more causal effects and also to be able to provide with information and see how this would shape the fairness perceptions of respondents. So in the first experiment, we're actually trying to see what allocation method citizens endorse more strongly. I told you before that the previous allocation method was just that the first entry, the first country where asylum seekers enter is the country that has to handle the application. That's the Dublin rule, the first entry rule. And this is actually the least supported method, because when we propose respondents with other methods based on the GDP capacity of the country or the population capacity of the country, they think that these methods are fairer. So when we provide them with these 3 options, they think that the no allocation of asylum seekers is the least fair way of dealing with asylum seekers in the European Union. We also see that when we provide information about what the consequences would be for your own country with each of the methods, this is going to shape fairness perception. So there is some sort of self-serving bias at play there. In the second experiment, however, we wanted to see whether presenting with a fair distribution among countries would boost fairness in your own country, would boost your willingness to accept more asylum seekers. So then we tell people, well, there are these 2 other countries that will be hosting so many asylum seekers. How many would you be willing to take in your own country? And then the fairer the distribution it is, the more it is supported by citizens. So again, this message that people like that costs are shared evenly across all member states, which I think kind of resonates and is quite intuitive. And now in my last slide, so that Francesco has enough time to get you through his examples, which are also very interesting. Just some implications that came out of this project from the data collection, from the survey and the experiments. Some implications for policy and communication were the following. So first, we learned that people seem to place a lot of value on how costs and responsibilities are shared in terms of, this topic, asylum seekers and migration. And perceived fairness has a very strong role. The way people feel that their country is taking more or less than other countries seems to be very important to shape how they feel about asylum seekers. Then, of course, we identified a number of knowledge gaps. Citizens have doubts and are not very sure about who handles what. So communication should definitely be improved, and rules about asylum should be made more transparent so that citizens feel more reassured. And finally, we are seeing that anti-migrant narratives across Europe in different contexts are focusing about the negative aspects of migration, the negative aspects of asylum, and they are appealing to this kind of emotions, anger, fear, etc. So then probably communication on our side, on the EU side, should put a focus on the positive aspects and appealing to other emotions and to fairness and to other elements that migrants bring, such as market participation and in general the societal contribution to counteract these anti-migration narratives. And I think I'm going to stop there and give the floor to Francesco. And thank him for passing the slides, by the way.
Thank you very much, Begoña. I hope you can hear me and can still see the slides. Because I cannot see, can you still see the slides, Begoña?
I see the last one of mine, the implication.
The last one, yes, perfect.
Yeah.
No, because I have some issues as well with the technical today. And so what we want to present now is a second case study, and it's about gender equality and specifically about gender attitudes. And it's a work that we did together with the Director General of Justice, so that is behind the policies on equality. And we wrote, it ended up in a very short policy brief. So it's the type of document that you write a lot here at the JRC. It's where it highlights in a short, simple documents the key results for policy makers and the public. So, and it's together with the colleagues that I cite here, Elizabeth, Mina, Oscar, and Paula, who are colleagues at the GRC in our unit. So what we look at in this policy brief is, so first, we know that gender equality has progressed in several domains over the past years, and traditional gender roles have diminished. On the other hand, gender stereotypes persist. And specifically, recent media discussions have brought up the concern about an increasing polarization of views between young women and men according to towards gender attitudes and gender roles and stereotypes. And so possible backlashes, especially of young men, in certain dimensions. And this is what we try to address with the data that we have in the policy brief, where we look at developments of gender attitudes in the EU along three dimensions that are the dimensions of the EU's gender equality strategy, which are violence, economy, and leadership. And to do so, we leverage data from recent Eurobarometer surveys on three main ones: on gender stereotypes, gender equality, and discrimination. I think you would find this in the very nice overview that was brought up by the project of questions. And the questions we have in this policy brief is whether first, simply whether gender attitudes we look at, whether they differ between men and women, and young and older age groups in the EU, on whether these gender attitudes become more egalitarian or not over time, and to what extent we can observe a polarization of gender attitudes, and especially among young generations. This comes in a background, a policy background, where gender equality is a core policy aim of the EU and of the Commission. Here in the quote of Ursula von der Leyen, you see that she's saying gender equality is a core principle, but is not yet a reality. So in 2020, it was built up the equality, gender equality policy for 5 years that was renewed in this year. And this is a part of a larger program of policy that aims at building a union of equality, where people are, as you see in the second quote, are able to live and regardless of differences. So in terms of sex, so better say that gender, and also gender and sexual orientation, but also ethnic origin, religion, disability, and age. And the gender equality strategy, the past one, 2025, had three main topics that we look at in this policy brief. The first one is said violence and stereotypes. Then is about thriving in a gender equal economy, where specifically it's important labor market outcomes. And the last one is about leading equally throughout society. So basically equality in decision making and politics. So, and we look at these three aspects in this very short document with the kind of variables that we had from the data. First, in this slide, present differences in the gender, so in the acceptance of violence, both physical and in terms of control. And you see here differences by women and men. So women are dark blue and men light blue, and by two different age groups, 18 to 24 and 40 plus. This is a snapshot of 2024. So a survey, your Eurobarometer survey on gender stereotypes. It was an online survey and non-prop based, but with the weights. You see that basically there is a large gap between young men and women in terms of the acceptance of men controlling partners' finances, with young men having a relatively high share of acceptance of this statement, both compared to young women, but also to older men and women. The same holds also for another statement that you see on the top right, whether people agree or that find it acceptable that man has sex with partner without consent, and you see a big difference between young men and young women, with young men having the highest share among the four groups depicted here. Same, what we find is about the statement about whether women exaggerate the abuse of rape claims, so stereotypes about these. And I move now to the second topic. This, of course, is a reason of concern, and we don't have, unfortunately, data for before 2024, but it would be interesting to see whether these have changed over time. What we can do with this statement, but we can do it with the one on labor market participation of mothers. So this is a kind of a question asking whether people agree that family suffers if the mother works full time. And you see here that these attitudes towards the acceptance of labor market participation of mothers have like the share of people have decreased, that the family suffers where the mother works full time, so they have become more egalitarian in almost all countries in the EU, and some have big improvements between 2014 in dark blue and 2024 in light blue. And on the other hand, what we see, it's again differences by age groups, and you see here that there was little progress for young men. You see it on the right hand side of the graph, where there was a slight improvement, or let's say a decrease in the share agreeing that the family suffers if mother works full time, from 52% to 84%, while there was a much larger decrease among young women aged 15 to 24. On the other hand, so basically, this comes up with a very large difference between young men and women in 2024 in this share of agreement. On the other hand, we don't see this large difference between older men and older women. And this comes again from other Eurobarometer surveys on gender equality. The third graph I'm showing you is about the acceptance of a female head of government, which it comes from Eurobarometer surveys on discrimination. And you see here a graph depicting over time the share of people comfortable with a female head of government in the EU by gender again and age. And you see basically that the gender gap of these, so between the dark blue and the light blue, has decreased. And especially it has decreased the difference between young women and young men, which actually seem to have reversed in 2023. So with more young men finding comfortable having a female head of government. So in terms of this, in this item, we don't see currently a difference between young men and women. On the other hand, there are large differences by macro regions in the EU, with the highest improvement in terms of and this acceptance having happened in Northern EU, but also in Southern EU countries, while Eastern EU countries have stayed more or less stable across the period considered. And with these results, what were the implications for policy and research? First, we find some evidence of an increasing polarization of views between young men and young women in several domains, but not all. And according to our reading also of the literature, we think that the causes of this increasing divide are still understudied. So I think this is also interesting for those of you that are willing to look at this topic, and to please look at the recent references there. But this had also implications for the EU gender equality strategy, and the new one, 2026-2030, also focuses more on initiative targets toward young men and boys. And for instance, there is a plan to carry out a study, a large study on online networks, fears, and narratives targeting them. so looking at time, I'm just very briefly presenting you two other case studies before I give the floor or we stop this morning session. The third one is about disparities by sexual orientation, so LGBTIQ equality, which is also a topic within the equality Union of Equality strategy of the EU. And we're looking here at disparities in health and well-being by sexual orientation, and it's a project that we did with a colleague, a former colleague at GRC, Matja Kovacic, who is now at the University of Verona, that we published. It started as a policy project, but we published in an economics journal, and you see the reference here. And very quickly, the reason why I mentioned this project is because I want to highlight our survey that we did in 2022. It's the EU Loneliness Survey. It was an online survey of all 27 EU countries that mainly focused on loneliness and well-being. And it has a part that is non-prop based, but a part also that is probability based in 4 countries. And the survey itself mainly focuses, as said, on loneliness, on social connections and well-being, but has different modules also that touch upon equality, and especially several interesting socio-demographic characteristics, like we have income, and more importantly for this project, we have a question on sexual orientation that is not that common to have in a cross-country EU survey. And I just give you one slide of the results, showing the disparities in health, well-being, and social support between sexual minority and heterosexual people in the EU. And you see here that gay, lesbian, bisexual people, or those of other sexual orientation, are more likely to experience more, to have a worse health, to feel depressed, feel lonely than their heterosexual peer. On the other hand, they're also less likely to have social support in case of need compared to them. And these results is just a highlight of the results of the paper, but that you can look at if you're interested. But this feeded also the LGBTIQ equality strategy in terms of looking at health differences and trying to close the gap in terms of health differences by between LGBTIQ people and heterosexual and other people. So the very last case study now that I want to present is about changes in perception of inequality and fairness. I think Istvan has talked a lot this morning about the measurement of inequality and also of perceptions of inequality. And we have measured this also in 2 Eurobarometer surveys. That's why I want to mention this project. Again, it was a policy brief that we published some time ago, 3 years ago, with the colleagues in the SMAC team. And few words about the Eurobarometer surveys on fairness. We carried out 2 special Eurobarometer surveys in 2017 and 2022, focused on fairness, inequality, and intergenerational mobility. So we have questions there on fairness perceptions, on inequality concerns, on preferences for redistribution. We have also questions that, for instance, Susan mentioned today about getting ahead in life. We have questions on perceptions of a relative income position and preferences for specific policies. And what I just want to show you very briefly is a graph about the change in perceptions in the EU in terms of income concerns. You see here on the left that the concern that income differences are too great between 2017 and 2022 have slightly decreased, very slightly, but decreased. Surprisingly, also because it was 2022, it was a period, after the outbreak of the COVID pandemic. And so had also perceptions about the government or preferences whether the government should reduce inequality by a slight decrease by 5 percentage points. On the other hand, on the right-hand side, you see that fairness perceptions measured by the item whether things that happen in your life are fair on average, the share of agreeing or strongly agreeing with this item has decreased from 52% to 38%. This was a big decline. And in the last slide, I just want to highlight that this decline was particularly high for young people and for students. It was a 20 percentage point decrease. This is a repeated cross section, so it's not a panel survey, but still it's done with very similar methods. And we basically, this also inform like the intergenerational fairness strategy, and we hope and I think there is the need to have similar surveys in the future, and also to measure this with the other surveys that were mentioned this morning. So with this, I would like to thank you very much. And here again, you find the our email and the link to our website, but we can post it also in the chat.